The forest path began wide and sunny, with the golden rays of late afternoon sending shafts of shimmering light through the branches as the four travelers moved quickly to reach the heart of Shabach. But as the path narrowed and became overgrown, and the trees grew denser and the light all but disappeared, Shelley and Ben could feel the forest's heartbeat pulsing inside them with ever-growing intensity. For Jim, however, it was much more profound. The closer he got to his birthplace, the more expansive he felt, like his journey home was filling him with more and more power every step he took. The human side of him was a little anxious, for he felt it slipping away and he didn't want it to fade into nothingness. A natural reaction any human felt about dying. But the Aian part of him knew that all was well and that he was simply returning to his true, natural form. This was good because if what he was hearing all around them was true, then he needed his full abilities available to him. Since they'd first entered Shabach, Jim had heard their pursuers following them in ever-increasing numbers. And although for now the protection spells were holding and they were keeping their distance, perhaps they didn't quite know what they were facing with two Kawatha and a guardian, they would soon start making more aggressive attempts to keep them from reaching Kawatha territory. Unfortunately, the four of them had to travel through Bagadon territory to reach Sally and the elders. And this stretch was the most dangerous part of their journey. He didn't know how he knew this, but the Bagadons understood who Mary was and that they had been given the task of capturing her and taking her to their Gantu. So Jim's primary assignment was to make sure that never happened. Walking behind him, Shelley saw him slowly begin to transform into his pure magical form the closer they got to home, and she marveled. She had not been born yet when the four Aian had been created by Kawatha magic soon after the emergence of their kind. But she knew everything about them and how they had protected the Kawatha and their allies during the Great Wars long before man had started appearing across Untuous. She couldn't be more relieved that he was here protecting Mary, and he would also be the most powerful one protecting the Shashas and elders during the ritual when they would be at their most vulnerable. Jim heard a twig snap to his left and held up a hand to halt his charges. They were a few miles into their journey already, and the air was moist and humid, making them sweat and breathe heavily. It was better to remain in human form for now, for Mary's sake, as she did not yet know that Shelley and Ben were ethereal beings and that Jim was made of pure energy. She would only discover this during the ritual after Sally first prepared her mind to accept the Kawatha and the truth about who she really was.
"Hunker down for a minute,"
Jim told them.
"I want to go see what we're up against. We might need to change direction."
Ben came over to Jim with his shotgun fully loaded and ready and gave him a nod.
"Maintain your flows. The longer we can stay invisible, the better."
He gave Mary a smile. Then, staying low, he moved fast through the trees and disappeared from view.
"I wonder if he's aware yet,"
Ben said softly to Shelley.
"If he isn't, he will be soon enough."
Ben was grateful for Sally's protection spells, still masking their presence, because Jim had started glowing as soon as they'd entered the older parts of Shabach. Mary sat on a moss-covered fallen branch and calmly studied her surroundings, and Ben was amazed that she seemed completely unaffected by everything.
"Do you think she knows what's coming?"
he asked. Shelley stroked her daughter's tangled hair and smiled.
On some level, yes, I think she does.
"How are you doing?"
Shelley snorted softly and felt her heart clench.
It's hard, Ben. I raised her knowing that this day would come, but she's crawled into my heart and our bond is strong.
Ben squeezed her shoulder.
"I feel the same," he said. "But I think when the time comes, our sorrow will turn into joy, because she will always be with us."
Yeah, I know. I'll just miss seeing her face every day.
"What you'll have will be much better."
Shelley nodded. Then they both turned their heads sharply when they heard a screech that was followed by sudden silence. Mary jumped and Shelley hugged her daughter to her.
It's all right, little one. Jim is protecting us, that's all. I know, Mommy.
Mary whispered.
He's the shining man.
Shelley and Ben gave each other wide-eyed looks.
He is indeed, my love,
Shelley said.
So no need to be scared, okay? I'm not. You and Ben are here and Jim is everywhere.
The more Mary's intuition and knowledge about who she was and who her mother, Ben, and Jim were, would expand. It was even possible that she'd know exactly why she was there by the time they arrived at the ritual site. Jim reappeared and hunkered down in front of them, panting lightly, and Shelley quickly reached up and rubbed his cheek to remove a bloody green smudge before Mary saw it. Killing the Bagadon had been a little messy, with a sharp tree branch he'd found on the ground, so he didn't need to use his gun. But at least the body would draw the others to it and away from them for a while.
"We need to take a different path to reach the river. The Bagadons have been distracted for now, but they'll soon realize what I've done and start tracking us again."
He gave Mary a grin and she smiled back, looking quite relaxed.
"Do you want to carry her?"
he asked Shelley.
I'm actually okay for now. I'm using some magic to lighten her, so I'm good.
"Okay, great. Ben, please return to rearguard and I'll lead us again."
Ben smiled and nodded, and they all stood up with Mary on Shelley's back. It seemed that Jim had no awareness yet that his speech and vocal intonations had also changed, and that he was thinking more like a guardian and less like a human. Ben was sure that by the time they reached Sally and the elders, that Jim Sutter would be no more. Seeing as Shelley was managing Mary, Jim led them faster than before, despite the density of the forest increasing exponentially as they headed towards the river. This was the same river that ran through the forest near town and was their main water source. Whenever Jim and Marie had taken their kids there for picnics, he'd always had a sense of being watched, and now he knew it to be true. The Ancient Ones had always been very present around Hallow Grove, and the water elementals had always watched over the sacred river to make sure that the water stayed pure. The poisoning of seas, lakes, and rivers across the earth was one of the primary reasons that the Ancient Ones regarded humans as toxic and disrespectful of their home, and they never understood why they did it. Was it laziness, or was it simply that humans didn't respect themselves? Even while living as humans for centuries, the Kawatha still did not understand the reason why they were so inherently nonchalant about the only home they had, and why they felt so driven to destroy it. And that's why the Kawatha could understand the hatred the Bagadons and many other tribes had for this young race. In many ways, they were like toddlers, with no discipline or desire to be told what to do. Shelley remembered the day 8 years ago that Sally had called their allies to a great gathering with the sole purpose of finding a solution to end this growing danger to their world. And it was the Avari tribal leader who had come up with a solution that would forever alter the course of human evolution. The Avari were the ones known most by the humans for their wings and tiny statures, some only a few inches tall, but their numbers were great, and they had thousands of communities all over the world. He had suggested to the Shashas and the other leaders that until humans had a complete change of heart and mind, and their spirits were one with nature, that they would never change their ways. It was a controversial statement, and so the discussions had gone on for weeks until the tribal leaders had come up with a bold solution that would not harm the humans and bring back an age of peace, abundance, and harmony long forgotten. They heard the river long before they saw it, and a few minutes later the four travelers arrived on the muddy embankment and marveled at the might of the ancient waters. The rapids were fierce and headed towards a thundering waterfall not far from them that fell about 30 meters down into a huge pool before continuing its journey deeper into Shabach. No human had ever set foot there, and right above the edge of the waterfall was the gateway into a magical world that had been there since the earth had been formed and the fires of creation had subsided, giving life to plants and animals and the first ancient ones.
While we wait for Sally to open the gateway from her side, I need to create a barrier to keep the Bagadons at bay,
Jim said. He'd been amazed as they traveled to experience his full awakening and with it the knowledge he needed to do his sacred duty. Creating a barrier would require a staff, and so he opened his heart and mind and searched the tree line. He felt the birch tree call to him before he saw it, and he ran over and reached up to one of the low branches, then spoke a single word.
Hantakios.
A sliver of golden light encompassed the entire base of the branch, and then it sliced off. Leaving its stub intact to regenerate. Again, using magic to speed things up, Jim removed the branch's twigs and knots, then stripped off its bark and shaped the smooth, solid staff that stood a few inches taller than him when it was finished. The next part was the most intricate and required all of his concentration. Closing his eyes, he held the staff horizontally in both hands and began a chant that struck up a strong breeze all around him. Shelley, Mary, and Ben watched from a safe distance and witnessed an amazing thing. Jim had disappeared inside a cocoon of yellow light, and his staff was glowing bright blue. As the supernatural windstorm intensified and Jim's voice got louder to match it, they retreated a little, and Mary clung to Shelley. But when she looked down at her little girl, she was surprised to see curiosity and wonder on her face, instead of what would have been fear from a typical 5-year-old. And it was then that Shelley knew that Mary understood everything. Pride filled her heart the same way it did on the day she was asked to become the bearer of her halfling daughter. As the only child of the Shashas, Shelley had considered it her sacred duty to help bring about a new age, and she didn't hesitate when her mother asked her to make this small sacrifice and mate with a human man. The Aian raised his staff above his head, and with a final shout, the light exploded away from him and left him a few inches taller at around 6'8", and his staff covered in glowing runes and crackling with blue energy. He turned to face the others, and Shelley bowed her head and said,
"Welcome home, Aian. We are honored by your presence."
And it was then that the Aian knew that Jim was no more.